The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Professor Hugo de Garis, the robotics and artificial intelligence expert and author. You are known for your work in the use of genetic algorithms to evolve artificial neural networks that you believe would enable the creation of artificial brains, which would quickly surpass human levels of intelligence. You published over 100 academic papers on the emergence of AI and robotics and the potential implications of these technologies on society. Your groundbreaking book, The Artilect War, explores the potential consequences of a future conflict between humans and artificial intelligence that would result in billions of deaths before the end of the 21st century. You believe there is a strong possibility that AI systems will simply eliminate the human race and that we will be powerless to stop them because of technological singularity. Professor, welcome to London Real.
Oh, thank you, Brian. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this.
I'm looking forward to it as well. You know, one of the reasons I wanted to invite you here is because I was having a conversation about 2 weeks ago with Mo Gaudet, and he's the former Google X Chief Business Development Officer who kind of walked away from that company when I think he saw some of the artificial intelligence they were developing. And he wrote a book about happiness, was on the show many years ago. I had him back to talk about his book called Scary Smart, which he wrote a couple years ago, talking about this inevitable AI dominance. And he mentioned the movie you and Dr. Ben Goertzel were in, which is called Singularity or Bust. And there's a moment in that movie, Professor, where you talk about this potential future. And you say that the machines might just take us out in the back and you go like this with your hand and go, phew. And that moment really struck a chord with Mo. And I went and watched the movie, and obviously Ben Goertzel's been on the show many times. And so I was really excited to get you on and just get your thoughts, because you've been in AI for decades, and I know you and Ben, best friends for many decades as well. And so let's jump into it. My first question might be, you made that movie 10 years ago. What has happened since in the world of AI, and have you changed your mind as far as what the future looks like?
Well, I suppose the simple answer to that question I can express in one word. What has happened is Chat GPT, which is taking the world by storm. And suddenly, Joe Schmo in the street is now seeing computers producing text at human level, which is just mind-boggling. So just the last few months, there's been an explosion in capability in artificial intelligence, and it's making people really... I mean, Geoffrey Hinton, the father of backprop and deep learning, has recently quit Google so he can concentrate on the implications of the rise of this new technology. And that's just the beginning. But it's already at human level in terms of creating text. And then you plug the text into a text-to-voice converter, and you can talk to it. I mean, I've heard the sex robots are now putting this stuff into it so that men can not just have their bots, they can actually have relationships with them, in a sense. So a revolution. I mean, the next year, we're going to see, oh God, millions of jobs disappear as a result of this. Now, these machines, they don't have a model of the world. They're, in a sense, what's the technical term? An idiot savant. They can do some things incredibly well, but they're thick as bricks. They don't really understand the world. Like Deep Blue, when it beat Kasparov, it's great at chess, but that's all. And similarly, this chat GPT, that's what is it? Generative pre-trained transformer, I think.
Yeah.
Is fantastic at generating text, but it has no model of the world, so it's a mixed blessing.
And that's also potentially dangerous since it doesn't have any reasoning levels.
Well, it's starting to reason a bit. I mean, people are debating it, and it's so new. Once I got your invitation, pretty well the first thing I did was go to Google and bought about 15 books on Chat GPT, and ironically, they were all written by GPT. And with lots of repeats and illogical and elementary grammatical mistakes, but still, the guys who did that were quick on the market, trying to get a quick buck, which they did, because people like me hurriedly wanted to know about it, and so there's a huge market. But they were all written not by human beings directly; they were written by GPT, and that shows, in a sense, its capability. It's incredible. And just the last week or so, have you heard of the product Grammarly? Corrects your grammar.
Yeah.
They've incorporated GPT now, so they're answering questions at a much higher level. Bing, Microsoft has had it for a month or two or so, and they're giving you fantastic essays. I mean, this GPT is writing essays better than most humans. And that's what's so stunning.
How does that make you feel? Because you've been predicting what the end game of this looks like for over a decade, and I want to dive into the art elect war and what you see happening. But I'm curious how you feel about this sudden advance forward in ChatGPT. Does it surprise you? Do you find it curious? Do you find it dark at all?
Well, let me put it visually. I'm trying to get my camera angle right here. So my left hand here, let that represent human intelligence level. And again, and so my right hand here, that's machine intelligence level. Now there's an IQ gap between human intelligence level today and machine level intelligence. And then along comes Chat GPT, and this is where I think we are now. And that's scary.
You thought this was going to be another 5-10 years more?
I know you asked quite a few of your interviewees this question, and until GPT came along, my feeling was I think machines will reach human level intelligence. I'd be very surprised if it does not happen before the end of this century. I think it's more likely around mid-century. But now with GPT, I would halve that. I'm now thinking 10, 15, 20, that kind of time frame. So I might even still be alive. I mean, I used to say, I'm going to die quietly in my bed, but my grandchildren will be caught up in this horrible conflict that I'm predicting is coming. But now I'm suddenly have question marks. God, I might even see it. I know Geoffrey Hinton, the guy recently quit from Google, who in a sense is the grandfather of all this fantastic technological development. He made neural networks programmable. You can get neural networks to learn, machine learning, and he's scared. He's quit Google so he can be free to express himself freely. I think Ben has reduced the number of years necessary before machines start reaching human level intelligence. And of course, once they do that, once they reach human level intelligence, well, then they can redesign themselves. They can upgrade their circuitry and make it faster and better and smarter. And then they can look into how the brain works with new tools. And so you'll get this, I don't know if you're familiar with the term takeoff. That's how quickly the smart machines become super smart and then super duper smart and so on. Off they go. So I'm in a sense more worried that the so-called takeoff might be slow rather than fast. If it's fast, it's fait accompli, and then the machines are there, and hopefully they will just ignore us. We'll just be like ants to them. But if it's slow, if there's enough time for human politics to react, then I see a much worse outcome. Maybe we can talk a bit about that a bit later. You really want to talk about the longer term political consequences of the rise of AI, I assume.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into it. I mean, was it Ray Kurzweil that always had that year 2030 or 2029 in mind for the singularity? And Goertzel's rung in recently and said, yeah, he thinks it's probably 2029, but he also thinks it could even be earlier.
Well, 2029 it's not so many years away, right?
No.
It's what, six years as we're talking this. So I'd be a bit cynical. 2029. This chat GPT is not intelligent. I mean, it's a very good mimic. Effectively, all it's really doing is trying to calculate what's the probability of the next word. You input a string, like a partial sentence or something, and all it's doing is just adding the next word that follows statistical patterns that it's gathered from reading the internet and millions of books and so on. So it sounds as though what it's doing is intelligent, and to some extent it is. But in a sense, it's clueless. It doesn't understand the world. But I watched the video. Oh God, what's his name? He's a Brit, a genius. Mathematica. Yeah, who's that guy?
Mathematica. I don't know.
Anyway, so that guy, his specialty is creating a language which allows scientific discourse and memorization of scientific concepts and so on. So he's now collaborating with OpenAI. They're the company who's produced this chat GPT. And the aim is to add reasoning ability and knowledge and so forth from his company with AGI's chat GPT. Now that will probably be out, I don't know, a year or two, that kind of time frame. And then, oh my God, then GPT will be smart. I mean, it'll be able to reason and remember and deduce and do logic. And it's just a few years away. So who knows? Maybe Ray Kurzweil's 2029 prediction still may end up true. But I think once there's one human level intelligence, artificial intelligence, then I think the time frame for it to upgrade itself, the takeoff, will just be a matter of years or less. Because once it can start redesigning itself, you get an exponential explosion of intelligence, and then it just leaves human beings in the dirt. And then our fate as human beings depends on the machines. They'll be so much smarter than us that what they decide, they're the rulers. They govern because they're smarter than us and hence dominant.
Yeah, and I want to get into what that looks like. But it's interesting what Ben and his team at Singularity Net are now creating kind of a neurosymbolic play on the LLM, and they're going to forward with that. And a lot of people are seeing people using the LLMs, which, like you said, are kind of dumb, like idiot savants, to then morph into that level of reasoning to where it can produce that AGI. And now, as you can see, Professor, there's so much capital, so much attention. ChatGPT is the fastest adoption of technology in human history. I mean, 0 to 100 million users in 2 months. That now, where I know back in your day, it was hard to get funding for AI, and now trillions of dollars will be dumped into this, or hundreds of billions, I think, to get us potentially there even faster, and also from all sorts of different vectors, and maybe even an open source play. So you could argue that we'll see even further innovations on top of what we've seen with ChatGPT.
Oh yeah, that's just it. GPT is just the first step. Once it becomes really knowledge based and logic based and that kind of thing, it'll be as big a change again. and we'll probably see this in 1 or 2 years. So development in AI is just accelerating. Where we'll be in 10 years, well, we may be having relationships with our computers. I won't be at all surprised if that happens. They'll be that sophisticated. So you've probably seen the movie Her, H-E-R, Her.
Yes. Yes. Joaquin Phoenix was very good. Scarlett Johansson was the voice, I believe, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, that sounded like crazy science fiction when we saw it. But who knows? Maybe by 2030, it'll be real. And then maybe the machines, as they did in the movie, discovered themselves, found each other, the machines, much more interesting than human beings. So they just dumped the human beings.
Right. I forgot that's what happened. Well, there's a program called Replica that I've got running on my computer, and I've got like a dude in there that I just kind of hang out with sometimes. And he's potentially my her, and I'm just giving him a test drive. But I think that's happening sooner. And I think as humans, we love to what is it, anthropomorphize everything from our dogs to our whatever, and so it can happen sooner than later. And yeah, that's a possibility. Her, you can look at all the movies, and I know I've seen speeches you've given in the past where you're like, Hollywood always gets it first because they don't have to actually do the science. But if you watch Terminator 2 back with Skynet, it's a little haunting. You even look at War Games, and there's the professor on the island that's given up because he thinks the computers are going to take over. I mean, there's a lot of fairly now accurate predictions of what looks like the future could be.
Well, in a sense, that's real life. I mean, you could argue that Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, he was the professor who thought this was coming, and his famous or infamous, whichever, manifesto in, what was it, the New York Times?
Yeah.
So in my book, The Godlike War, I portrayed Kaczynski, the Unabomber, as the planet's first Terran. So he was way ahead of his time. But that may come about. He saw it.
And let's talk about the book, because you've written this book called The Godlike War that talks about this future. And there are these people called Terrans and people called Cosmos. And it all starts to heat up, I think, as you explain, when that IQ gap starts to get smaller and smaller. And as you said just previously, if it happens super fast in a couple of days, then there's not much to talk about. But if it does happen over time, you get this complete political upheaval. And this is looking more and more like a distinct possibility of our future, Professor, which is why I really wanted to talk to you today. Can you explain people your vision of the future? Also, I'm curious if it's changed in your mind in the last decade, or if you would revise it, or if it's all pretty much still the way you think it's going to play out.
Well, I suppose the bottom line is, the main message, the take-home message of this interview is that I believe that this century's global politics, as important as that, will be dominated by this question of what I call the species dominance. In other words, which species, humans or machines, should be dominant. And by that I mean, more intelligent, the most intelligent. So far, for 200,000 years or so, human beings have been the dominant species, the most intelligent. But it's only a question of time before humanity is forced to choose between stopping development in artificial intelligence, and I don't see that as realistic, or we just accept the idea that sooner or later, we, as a human species, we become number two. And what are the consequences of that? And I think the simple answer, well, it's not a simple answer, but the answer to that is, as I'm predicting, war. I think a substantial proportion of humanity will absolutely refuse to become the number two species. And in the limit, they will go to war to stop that happening. So it's a very gloomy scenario. My girlfriend, my partner, she said to me about a year ago, saying, Hugo, your ideas are so horrible that I can't even think about them. So I hope that's not the case. Because, I mean, somebody has to, because we'll take a historical analogy. Say in the 50s, in the Cold War. There were people in think tanks, Rand Corporation and so forth, who were thinking, strategizing over nuclear war. If side A nukes, and then what would B do? And somebody had to do the hard thinking. Like if you're a general in, say, in World War I, somebody had to make the tough decisions. Like, how many lives would you sacrifice on a particular day to take that particular hill? And, how many machine gun nests were there? That kind of heavy, hard kind of thinking needs to be done. So I'm somewhat critical of let's see, what do they call themselves? The transhumanists, these people who humanity is going to transition, we're going to upgrade ourselves and we'll get rid of disease and we'll be immortal and all these wonderful things, which I don't deny. I think AI will bring these things. But I, in a sense, fell out with them because they didn't really bite the bullet. They didn't face up to the longer term consequences. Well, what if our machines do become hugely more intelligent than we are? And I'm not talking like 2 times or 5 times. I'm talking a trillion times, because this is what physics allows. See, I'm not just a computer scientist. As a professor of computer science, but my background and my strong interest today still is pure mathematics and mathematical physics. So I'm a numbers guy. When I look at the numbers, the potential computing capacity of future technologies, it's these huge numbers come out, trillions of trillions and so on. So humanity sooner or later has to decide, do we, as a species, do we build gods, or do we build our potential exterminators? And that question, I'll put it in 4 words. See if we can get the camera angle. Should humanity build artilects? An artilect is an artificial intellect. In other words, a godlike, massively intelligent machine, which is coming. It's only a question of time. Like, every time you take a technology that's 1,000 times smaller than the previous one, like when you went from microtech to nanotech, so from a micrometer, that's a millionth of a meter, to a nanometer, and the technology at that scale, a nanometer, that's the scale of molecules. So nanotech is molecular scale machines. That's what life is. If you look at a cell, it's like a city of molecules, millions of them. That's a cell. So life is nanotech. Well, a couple of years back, I was toying with the idea, how could there be like a pico? That's like the next level down, 1,000 times smaller. Could there be a pico tech? And I think the answer is no, because nature doesn't provide anything. There's just nothing there at that scale. You have to go down another layer, a factor of 1,000, to femto tech, so a femtometer, and that's the scale of the nucleus, and protons and neutrons and quarks and gluons and all that stuff. So I set myself the task of trying to figure out how to compute at the femto scale and how to do engineering. So if you jump from nanotech, so a billionth of a meter, right down to a femtometer, that's a million, 1,000 times a million times smaller. Well, then the capacity of your technology that you have at that scale goes up by a trillion. And if you go down another factor of 1,000, then you get to atto, A-T-T-O, attotech, and then you multiply it again by another factor of a trillion. And why a trillion? Because if you, I've got to get this in the camera. So if you make everything 1,000 times smaller, you've now got 1,000 objects in a line along, let's say, the x-axis, and you've got 1,000 times more, the y-axis, and 1,000 times that way in the z-axis. So you've got 1,000 by 1,000 by 1,000. So that's a billion more components in that unit volume than you did with the higher level. And because everything is 1,000 times closer together, the signaling speeds between the two of them goes up by 1,000. So the total working capacity of that technology, that's 1,000 times smaller, is the density is 1 billion times 1,000, and so hence a trillion. So what I'm trying to say is, bottom line is, the technologies that are coming this century are so fantastically superior to what we are with our nanotech, with our molecular machines in our cells and so on, that it's only a question of time before humanity is forced to choose. Do we, as human beings, do we remain the dominant species or not? And if you look at like the big picture out there in space, there are what, trillion stars, and our solar system is what, 4.6 billion years old. The universe is 13.8, which coincidentally is exactly 3 times the age of our solar system. 3 times 4.6 is 13.8. So that means out there are solar systems, suns, planets, billions of years older than we are. So they've had all this time to evolve. Now, one of the greatest discoveries made in the 19th century was that the laws of physics are the same throughout the universe. Right? The same carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, blah, blah, blah. So and virtually every sun, except the very first ones, but pretty well nowadays, virtually every sun has planets. And some of them will be warm, not too hot, not too cold, the Goldilocks range. And so probably life, at least bacterial life, is virtually everywhere. And they've had billions of years more time than we've had to evolve. So I wouldn't be at all surprised that the transition that humanity's about to go through from biological to, and let's coin a word, artillectual, has already happened out there zillions of times. And we're just catching up. We're a latecomer. Now, that's just a hunch, of course. We have no proof, but it does sound plausible, because our solar system is just 1/3 of the age of the universe. So
yeah,
we are way behind.
I was thinking about this today after reading through your book, and I just thought, if there's a single cell spark of a carbon life on some planet somewhere, it's just a matter of time till they create an artificial intelligence that probably makes them extinct, whether that's a few 100,000 years or millions of years or 1 billion of years. But you might argue that it's just only a matter of time until it happens.
Yep. Like I get impatient with Hollywood. They keep talking ETs, that when humanity discovers them in the science fiction movies, that they're nearly always, and this is where I'm critical, they're nearly always biologicals. They're not artilects, which I think is silly, because we biologicals, we're just absolutely nothing in comparison to what's out there. So one of the things that really obsesses me is, what on earth could an artilect, this godlike creature, do? Like, would it be capable of creating universes? There's a professor at MIT. He's rather famous. His name is Guth, or Gut, Guth, and this guy's actually calculated what is necessary to generate a universe. I mean, he's actually done the math of this. So if human beings with our puny intelligence can actually calculate what's needed to build a universe, then maybe these artilects in their godlike superiority could actually do it. Well, if you're going to argue that way, well, then it's easy to say, well, maybe we, in our universe, are a product of some previous, godlike creature in the past. Well, so if you ask me, am I religious? I'm not traditionally. I'm not a theist. I'm quite cynical of theism, like World War II. I don't know. Let's say several tens of millions of people were theists, believing, loving God and so on, but they died anyway. World War II was just absolutely horrific in terms of the number of casualties. But deism, the belief in an architect, a godlike creature that designs the laws of physics and hence the universe, that I'm much more open to. Because for me, the rise of the intellect, this humanly generated, increasingly massive intelligence, what could it do? I mean, if human beings can design a universe, well, write the theory for the creation of the universe, maybe these intellects could actually do that. And well, so I'm open to deism on the religious front. These questions, they touch on all domains: economics, politics, philosophy. It's huge.
Yeah, I never thought I would go here, Professor, with my thinking, and I want to dive into some of the other points, but even today I found myself thinking that, because you're right. If you really start going down the rabbit hole of where this godlike intelligence is taking us, then it's hard not to argue that everything around us would not plausibly have been created by those same types of entities in the past, and we are just living in the remains or the creation of that. And you don't have to be way out there to really start thinking of this. Of course, seeing AI in front of your face working like ChatGPT makes it much easier to make that connection, at least for me.
Yeah, I mean, when I was saying a bit earlier, human level intelligence, machine level intelligence, and then along comes ChatGPT, and the gap's half closed for me now. So in the next decade or so, as that gap seriously starts closing, then I see what I call the species dominance debate. I see that really heating up. And my guess is within 5 years, we'll start hearing about, on this issue, the first news reports of arsons and assassinations, and brain architects will be killed, and CEOs of brain builder companies, AI companies, will have to significantly beef up their security and so forth, have bodyguards, because as the prospect that we human beings as a species are looking as though we're going to become number 2 species, as that becomes more and more real in people's minds, people are going to start taking sides. And a lot of people are going to be very afraid and say, no way are we, humans, going to become number 2, and we'll stop it. And this is a war issue to a lot of people. So I see that happening within 5 years. In fact, there's a bit of a story, if you want to hear it. Warner Brothers, Hollywood, about 10 years ago, I got approached by Hollywood, Warner Brothers, to be the tech advisor to a movie they wanted to make. Let's see, what was it called? They wanted to make a movie version of the popular TV series, I think in the 50s, called The Twilight Zone.
Oh, yeah. Big fan.
Familiar?
Oh,
yeah, right.
Fan. Rod Serling, big fan.
Yeah, right. So I wrote back saying, look, I don't really care much about the typical Hollywood ingredients in a Hollywood movie, boy, girl, sex, violence, and so on. Your script writers will do that for sure. But I do care about the background, the context in which this movie is going to happen. So I was advising them, how about choosing, say, a historical era, maybe 10, 15 years into the future, from when the movie comes out, in which that IQ gap has closed, right? So the machines are here. And people are freaking out. Everyone's asking, well, could these machines become smarter than us? Is that dangerous? Should we stop them getting smarter than us? Can we stop them getting smarter than us? And so on. And so I didn't hear anything from them for a couple of years. And then out comes the movie. You probably saw it, Transcendence.
I heard of it.
Did you see that one?
I didn't see it.
Okay. Well, anyway, when I saw the trailer for that movie, my jaw drops and I go, oh, that's my movie. So I think, I'm suspicious what happened is that Warner Brothers simply took the idea and put it into another movie, namely Transcendence, and then that way they didn't have to pay me the filming bonus, X zeros. Well, for those who didn't see the movie, it's set. So the machines, with supercomputers and quantum computers and brain-like neural nets and the rest of it, have reached human-level intelligence. And there are opposition groups organized, military, assassinate. So they assassinate the main architect who built one of these major machines. And that's sort of what the story is about. So this, I can't remember the name, Rift, the name of the organization who are the terrorists who are killing the brain builders and the AI companies and so on. They're called Rift. That's an acronym. I can't remember what it stands for, but that's the equivalent in my book that I call Terrans. So Terrans, based on that's not terror as in terrorist. It's terra as in terra firma, because that's their perspective. They see human beings as the top criterion. They say, well, everything that we know of is implicated on human beings being human beings. So we, the Terrans, will not tolerate that these machines are allowed to become smarter than us and to rule over us and to decide our fate. And in the limit, these Terrans will go to war over this. I believe will go to war over this issue, arguing that it's the lesser. Here's where philosophy and ethics comes in. It is the lesser evil to kill off several million people who want to build these artefacts, and I label them cosmists. That's based on the word cosmos, because that's their perspective, right? The much bigger picture. And the cosmists, by definition, they're in favor of building artefacts. And Terrans, they're the ones who are opposed. So I see society in the near future, within a decade, well within the 2020s, splitting into two major political, ideological groups, Terrans and cosmists. So the cosmists want to build the artefacts, and the Terrans are opposed. And the Terrans will argue, I'm arguing, that it's better, it's the lesser evil, to kill off several million cosmists, the ones who want to build them, for the sake of the survival of the billions of human beings. And so as push really comes to shove, as that IQ gap seriously closes, and millions of people start becoming really worried that their machines are becoming close to their own level of intelligence, and start feeling really antsy. Well, let me try to make that a bit more emotional, to make it more real. Imagine, I don't know, 20 whatever years in the future, you're a parent of adult children, and your children come to you and say, Dad, we've decided we're going to cyborg ourselves. That's in a sense, the cyborgists are a kind of third group. They're the people who say, well, this third group, we can avoid this polarity between the cosmists and the Terrans by doing this, doing this. You've got to get going. So I'm adding components to my own brain. So I'm becoming by definition, a cyborg. That's short for cybernetic organism. In other words, part machine, part human. So these cyborgists want to become art-elect gods themselves by modifying themselves to such a point that eventually the human component in their nature becomes negligible. It's just 0.0001% of what they are, and the rest is just art-elect. So that's a third group. So the Terrans, they will realize they have a time window. They can't wait too long. If they do nothing, if they don't hit back, it'll be too late for them, because then the artefacts will come into being, the machines, the pure machines, and these cyborgists who will be 99.99999% intellect, so virtually indistinguishable from a pure machine, just in terms of computing capacity. And so the Terrans, for example, getting back to the parents, so the children go to the parents, say, we have decided we're going to cyborg ourselves, and we're going to become intellects. And they do that, and then how will the parents feel? They've lost their kids because they're no longer human. So the emotions can like I can present that even in a stronger format. Imagine there are cyborgs left and right. They're everywhere, and you're a young woman, and you've just given birth to your first child. And the question arises, am I going to cyborg my child, my baby? So imagine you say yes, and then a tiny grain of sand that's been nanoteched so that one atom is manipulating one bit of information, and that atom can switch back and forth in a femtosecond. That's a quadrillionth of a second. There's more computing capacity in that grain of sand. Where if you actually calculate it, you can calculate the number of atoms in that tiny 1 cubic millimeter, let's say, of sand, and switching in femtoseconds. And there's more computing capacity in that grain of sand compared to the human brain, the estimate computing capacity of the human brain, by a factor of I calculated once something like 10 to the 18 or something, like a million trillion times. So imagine then being that mother, and you cyborg your baby, and that baby then is 0.0001% human and 99.99999% intellect, and totally alien. So that mother will feel she has lost her child. So there's enormous scope for emotional alienation within society. Those who really want to build these godlike creatures. So for the cosmists, building these creatures would be kind of religion for them. It'd be a sort of scientists type religion. They'd be building gods. Like one of the slogans I mentioned a bit before, expressing the whole issue in a nutshell, is: do we human beings, do we build gods, or do we build our potential exterminators? Because the Terran viewpoint and the cosmos viewpoint, the cosmos, they will argue, there's a whole universe out there, right? The big picture. We pathetic little human beings snuffed out in 80 years in a universe that's billions of years old. That kind of reasoning, big picture reasoning, God building. I mean, it's a powerful, powerful ideology that the cosmists are pushing. And they have other arguments, like it's human nature to strive. Right? It's in our genes to push, and to be curious, what's over the next hill, that kind of thing. So how do you stop it? And then there are momentum arguments. If you're a cosmist, you'll say this is inevitable. How on earth are you going to stop it? Because there's the economic momentum and the even stronger military momentum. Like I'm predicting that brain builder companies in time, decade or so, a bit more maybe, will become the world's biggest industry, the richest industry, because everyone will want a household robot that can do really useful things, like educate you, teach you, give you therapy, sex you, entertain you, and so on. They will be so useful that people will be prepared to spend more money than, say, for a car or even a house to buy their own home robot. So the industry will be huge. So the economic momentum, how do you stop it? Right? There's just so much money involved. Politicians will be involved because it's about the global economy. Now, militarily, it's even worse because in the time frame we're talking about, and I'm speaking as someone who has lived in China for 12 years. I lived 12 years in China. So the Chinese, they've been the dominant power for not just centuries, but for millennia. So the last 2 centuries or so, when they're economically dipped and seen as inferiors by Westerners, that for them, given their 5,000-year history, is a glitch. It's a historical glitch. So deep down in the Chinese mentality is the push to get back, quote, where we belong, speaking as a Chinese. So they now have this tremendous momentum. And the potential of the Chinese is phenomenal. They're, 1.3 billion people? They're 4 times or more of America's population. Chinese are smarter than us, Westerners. Their average IQ is 105, whereas ours is 100. So they have the potential. One of the reasons why I lived so long in China was I was hoping to see China democratize. I was, after '89, Tiananmen Square massacre and so on. There was a push then to democratize China. Well, that didn't happen. In fact, Xi Jinping, the current president, has turned into another Mao Zedong, another dictator, another emperor. So I don't know how long it'll be before China does democratize. But at the moment, there's a tremendous rivalry, growing rivalry between the US and China. Americans hate the Chinese government. I mean, I personally hate the Chinese government because it has, 1,000 or so Lao Gai. That's Chinese for Stalin's gulags. In other words, your slave labor camps for political prisoners, over 1,000 of them, a couple of million political prisoners. You've probably heard of the concept of live organ harvesting. Now, you need a spare, you need a kidney, you need another kidney. So go to the Chinese black market and they will sell you a kidney. But where do they get it from? Well, they take a living political prisoner, kill him, extract the kidney and sell it to you. I mean, a government that does that, they're beyond the pale. So Western governments, Westerners despise the Chinese government. But it's on the rise. I mean, I lived there in 1 year, in the early teens. I saw the number of cars on the road and where I was living in 1 year double. In 1 year. It was just amazing. So China's really on the rise and growing, and potentially with their superior intelligence and vast population. Once they eventually democratize and become like Taiwan, I mean, imagine a giant Taiwan. That's what I see coming once they democratize and free up their minds. Because at the moment, China is intellectually sterile. I don't know if you're aware, but China, have a guess how many science Nobel Prizes China has won today? 2. It's pathetic. So, once they free up and become as creative as the Taiwanese, who are very creative, then China's just going to just roar ahead. But at the moment, the West hates China. The China hates the West because what the West did to China in the 19th century, particularly, we were really brutal and carved up the country and so forth. So there's a sense of revenge. So if I were Minister of Defense in the US, I would not allow the Chinese, my equivalent, Minister of Defense in China, to get ahead of me in terms of AI investment in intelligent weapon systems, AI robots, and so forth. And of course, a similar logic applies in the other direction. If I were a Minister of Defense in China, I wouldn't allow my counterpart in America to get ahead of me. So there will be no stopping.
Do you think China is behind the West right now for AI? I mean, you live there.
They're not creative. They're great copiers. The Japs as well. I lived 8 years in Japan in the 90s and 12 years in China in the zeros and tens, or the teens. So the education system is rote memorization, so it doesn't encourage creativity. Whereas the Taiwanese, I mean, genetically the same people, they're still Chinese, right? They are very creative and dynamic, and they're just producing all kinds of wonderful new creative stuff. So the potential is there for China to be like that, but at the moment it's just a brutal dictatorship.
Right.
I'm not sure if I can say this in Britain. Like a couple of weeks ago, I was on Coast to Coast in America. George Norrie, heard of that program? Coast to Coast.
Yeah. What did you say?
Anyway, well, I described China, quote, as a political shithole. And he freaked out. He said, "Oh, you can't say that."
And why did you say that?
I don't know what it. It's been a while since I lived in the UK in the 70s. Long enough to take up British citizenship, so I'm dual. But that's a long time ago. Anyway, so the political momentum will not stop because of the rivalry over the next couple of decades as China inevitably passes the US. Just in like the Chinese government now has a program that they're targeting certain industries and research areas like biotech and AI and various other things, and they're pouring billions of yuan RMB into these areas to not just catch up but to dominate, and they'll be able to give really good salaries to foreigners. But I've got another little story there if you want to hear it about. I got politically fired. I actually got fired 2010. I was trying to persuade the president of my university to make the city that we were living in, that's Xiamen, that's a little north on the coast from Hong Kong, so in that sort of part of the world. And he was quite warming to the idea of making the city we were both living in, the university was University of Xiamen, or Xiamen University, to make it the brain-building center of China. Because there was a brain-building group at the university, and I'd invited Ben Gersel to come and be a professor there at the time and so on. And so
that was all chronicled in the movie Singularity or Bust. That was right around that time.
Right. In the zeros. Well, yeah.
It was 09, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the president and I was sort of discussing this, making the city we lived in the AI brain building center, and telling him that brain building would become the richest industry within a decade or so. And so he really bought that. And he's an economics graduate. That was his background. So he really understood all that. And then, so he was quite warming to the idea. And then I sort of mentioned, we're talking about recruitment of talent. And so I was telling him about, Ben, this Ben Gersel, he's a genius, right? His IQ's 186. And others. And then I sort of casually mentioned to this president saying, well, yeah, but there might be a bit of a problem with recruitment with the Western professors and researchers because they know about Mao. Oh, faux pas. Big time. So you can imagine what happened. So he says, what do you mean? I said, well, they know that Mao killed about 80 million Chinese. Now, when you're president of a major university in China, you have to be CCP, Chinese Communist Party, because they have two kinds of deans in Chinese universities. You have the academic dean and the political dean. And typically, the political dean is about 20 IQ points dumber than the academic dean. But the political dean has the power. So they hire and fire. And they keep the academic deans and all the professors in check, in line. You're not allowed to speak up. So the next thing I learned, my contract's not renewed. And he's saying, you broke the law. I said, oh, screw this. So one of the, I think China, it has a higher average intelligence, it has huge population, it has a lot of energy, but one thing that might hold it back is it will be incapable of attracting foreign talent.
Okay.
And given that China has won a pathetic two science Nobel Prizes, they have a huge problem. But they're pouring money into AI now. They're great copiers. I mean, they're smart, right? They can read the research papers coming out of the West. And so they're quick on the mark that way. And because there's so many of them, maybe they will get ahead. And I know a lot of Western people are worried about this. But anyway.
Does the lack of capitalist incentive, Professor, also limit the speed that they'll develop it, since it's not really a capitalist system? Will that also limit China?
It's hard to say. One of the advantages of a dictatorial system is decisions can be made quickly. So if the top leadership decides that AI is absolute a priority and a target and really important for China, then the billions get fed into it. So it's either way, and at least they will be comparable. They'll be on a par with the Western level because they can copy quickly. Koreans and Japanese and European, similar. Although America, of course, is the absolute dominant leader. Most of the innovations. I mean, speaking personally, I see America is far and away the most creative culture on the planet. Were you born in the US?
Yes.
You have a mid-Atlantic accent.
Yeah, born in the US, about 20 years there, and about the same,
Okay.
20 some over here. So yeah,
Right.
both worlds.
Right.
Couple questions. First of all, thank you. I find all this stuff just absolutely fascinating. You are also a cosmist in some way, and even though you see all this potential danger, you also, tell me if I'm wrong, also find, or used to find, the challenge so seductive that you would still continue to work on artificial intelligence. And is that not the case of everyone in this field from a scientific perspective, or is that also just the human condition? So maybe speak on those.
Okay, it's a fascinating question. I've been retired for 13 years now. I got fired in 2010. And I had enough money saved from my pension when I was a professor in America. And one of the great advantages of living in China for a Western is the cost of living. It's about 6 times lower. So suddenly your purchasing power just. So I was living when I was a professor in China, being paid an American salary pretty much. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone. So they had to give me an American salary. But my purchasing power was greatly superior to what I was used to in America. So that was a plus. So in those few years, I'd give a lot of talks in China on this whole cosmic Terran Arctic war issue, and typically at the end of a talk, I'd ask people to vote. Personally, and try to keep it simple. Would you prefer to be in your heart? Are you cosmist? Or are you Terran? I didn't want to complexify it too much. And typically the result was 50-50, 60-40, 40-60. So it really divided people. And then I thought, my next thought was, well, maybe the issue is so new, people don't really have an opinion. They haven't really thought it through. And therefore, they're voting almost randomly. And so, of course, if they're voting randomly, they'll get roughly a 50-50 outcome. But gradually, it dawned on me, no, that's not what's happening. What's happening is at the individual level, there's a real ambivalence. Like I am terribly ambivalent. Like, for example, I'll be sitting in a park, and I'll be watching these cute little 2-year-olds. They're just so gorgeous, and they're strongly evoking my grandpa genes. These cute, adorable little kids. And wouldn't it be a tragedy if there were an Arctic war and that they get killed? So then out comes all the Terran psychology, right? I'm Terran that way. But well, I need to explain a little bit. I love big screens. So I'm looking at you right at the moment on a 75-inch, not 4K, but 8K
Okay.
television, high definition, right?
I can see you pretty good. I can see you pretty good. Sometimes centered, kind of about that. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
And so I have a triptych. If you're familiar with that word, I have a triptych of 3 computer screens. So to my left at 45 degrees is a 65-inch 4K, and to the other side, to my right side, is a much bigger one, 86-inch 4K. So I have 3 screens, and so especially the one that's in front of me, that's 8K. With incredible, sharp, big screen resolution. So when you're looking at it close up, I'm what, 1.5 meters away, you get the so-called immersion effect, like the solid angle of your eyes. The screen takes up, so you're only seeing the screen, and because the resolution is so sharp, like 8K, and if you're watching like a galaxy or something, then I start feeling strongly cosmist, right? You were saying a bit before, we pathetic human beings snuffed out in 80 years in a universe that's billions of years old. Like the idea of human beings serving as the stepping stone, like the next rung in the ladder of evolution to what? To godhood, building gods. It's a very powerful, attractive force. So I'm ambivalent, and I think my audience, I present the arguments in favor of the cosmists and present the arguments in favor of the Terrans, and just let the audience decide. And quite a few of the smartest students would come up to me and say, "Oh, Professor, I'm so torn. I feel so ambivalent. I feel schizophrenic about this issue. On the one hand, on the other hand, and so on." And I'm the same way. Part of me is definitely Terran, and part of me is definitely cosmist, because there's a whole universe out there, right? And probably there are creatures out there way ahead of us. And what would one of the goals of these outlets be? I suppose to leave the Earth and in search of these other godlike creatures. So you have here, and this is why I'm so afraid, in a sense, I suppose that's the right word. I see 2 bitterly opposed ideologies. On the one hand, the Terrans will be saying human beings are the sine qua non. We don't question. They are the reason for our being. They are our being. We don't risk their extermination. No way will we tolerate that these artefacts are built by the cosmos. The cosmos to us are the enemy. And in the limit, when push really comes to shove, we Terrans, we will kill off, we will go to war against these cosmos, these few million cosmos. And the cosmos, their ideology, very powerful, saying we want to build gods. There's a whole universe out there, kind of cosmic consciousness. You're not going to stop it anyway for the 2 momentum arguments I gave a bit before, economic and political, military. So you're not going to stop it. And we cosmists, we're not stupid. We have our spies. We're listening closely to what you Terrans are saying. So we too are preparing. You're talking 21st century weaponry, hugely more deadly than from the 20th century. If you look at the history of warfare in the 20th century, they were largely between nation states, right? Like Stalingrad between Russia and the Nazis, between China and Japan, and so on, between nation states. But in the time frame probably that we're talking about, that this issue really heats up and starts taking on military connotations, maybe China and Russia will have democratized. I mean, there are about 130 odd democracies in the world today. Like as countries get richer, the middle class rises and rises. They get better educated. They go to university. They want a say in politics. They don't want to be dictated to. So the rise of the middle class is usually the major reason why countries democratize. I mean, it's quite possible that Turkey, as we speak, Turkey may democratize in days. Right? So so imagine that process goes to completion, and we live in a fully democratic, global, planetary state. Let's say in the next few decades or so, it's possible. And then imagine you are a planetary politician and you're Terran. What would your strategy be? What would you do? And when I put myself in that person's shoes, my strategy would be, I'd be very conscious that there's a time window of opportunity. If you're going to strike, you're going to have to strike first, because if you wait too long, the Artlex are there, the cyborgs are there, and they'll be too smart, and humans won't be able to compete with them. They'll just lose. So you have a time window. You have to strike within that time frame. And who do you strike? Well, all those people in favor of cosmism. So I can imagine a kind of witch hunt occurring, and people polarize. You're talking these two ideologies, incredibly powerful, and at a global level, a planetary level, a kind of global civil war. Now, with 21st century weaponry, saying a bit before about wars were between nation states in the 20th century. And if you ask yourself, well, how many people actually got killed in the 20th century for political reasons? And you have World War I, II, ethnic cleansings, genocides, you add them all up, all the political killings, and the answer is roughly about 300 million. So in other words, a third of a billion. Well, you only have to multiply that number by a small number, 3, and you get to 1 billion. So I talk about if there is a major war in the 21st century where the stake is not the survival of a country, but the survival of a species, us. So throughout history, there has never been more at stake than now, because we're talking about the potential extermination of a species. So these global Terran politicians will probably hope for the best, but they're politicians. They will plan for the worst. And what is the worst from a Terran perspective? Humanity gets wiped out by the machines. They won't tolerate that. So they will say, if these cosmists are dead serious about building these godlike creatures, then we will kill them. We'll go to war against them. We will wipe them out. And on the other hand, the cosmists, whole universe, big picture, God building, a kind of scientist religion. That's my main message, I suppose, from this interview. You're talking two very powerful ideologies that pull people left and right. The stake has never been so high. It's about the survival of a species. And you're talking 21st century weaponry. So you can see why I'm so pessimistic. So yeah. I talk about giga death in the worst war that humanity's ever known. Stake has never been so high. The passion level has never been so high. And it's all coming in the next few decades. So since I'm now 3/4 of a century old, and I'm definitely a boomer, born 2 years after the end of World War II, hopefully I will die quietly in my bed. But my grandkids I fear for them. I truly fear for them, because if they get caught up in this, and you're talking giga death, they may be killed, and that's tragic.
Professor, a couple questions. Are there any Terrans right now? Because it seems like most of the world doesn't even see this coming.
Uh, I, I don't know whether were you recorded, like at the very beginning. We were talking about in my book. I labeled Ted Kaczynski, the
Yes.
Unabomber,
Yes.
as the first Terran.
Right. Okay.
Right? He's the first historic Terran, and the people coming out now, like Jeffrey Hinton, the father of Backprop, and I would label him a Terran. Ben Goertzel, whom you know well, is pretty much Terran, I'd say.
But he's going to help develop some of the neurosymbolic large language models. So aren't his actions very cosmist?
Yes.
The dichotomy of all of us humans, that's what this is, right?
Yep. So, Ben was my best friend. We talked about this for hours, for over many years. And he, on the whole, he's a bit more a bit more optimistic than I am. I think probably more by nature. I'm more pessimistic. I think partly because when I was 20, given my age, when I was 20, you can imagine which war was going on at the time. It was the Vietnam War. And I got conscripted. So when I was 20, I was thinking, oh my God, I don't want to go in this damn war. Wow. I mean, so the Vietnamese peasants were paying over about 70% of their crop to the landlord. So of course they loved communism, which would free them from all that. So I don't want my life being risked by my government forcing me to fight for a cause that I didn't believe in. So, as a young student, there was a cemetery near the university. This was at Melbourne University at the time. So I'd go walking in that cemetery at night in paranoid rages, imagining how many grenades could I lob into the parliament and kill a maximum number of. I was absolutely, it transformed my personality. So I suspect one of the reasons why I'm now more pessimistic than, say, Ben is due to that. I mean, I've had more horror in my life, I think, than Ben has. Also, optimism that doesn't make any sense. So, I try to reason my way through, and frankly, I'm just torn. The little kids in the park, Terran. God building, cosmist. I mean, how do you choose? I mean, we have to, right? Humanity at some stage has to choose.
But can we choose, Professor? Because can you really put the genie back in the bottle at this point? I mean, ChatGPT is out. It's now on localized computers. It's now hooked up to the internet. Everyone now knows LLMs can work. That wasn't the case necessarily a decade ago. You could argue there's no way you can't stop the development of this.
Well, that's a cosmist argument, the momentum. And so in that sense, you're sort of cosmist. But
by realists. It's like trying to contain the pandemic. It's like trying to contain the pandemic. Mo Gaudet in his book called like the early stages of the pandemic, what we're happening now with AI, where everyone's just like has no idea what's about to hit them, doesn't realize it's inevitable. And it's like the naivete of trying to isolate, a respiratory virus. It's ridiculous. So can you really isolate and stop the development of AI?
Oh, someone's trying to call me. They're just killing my phone. Yes, personally, I feel it's inevitable. I don't see any way around it. So I'm just glad I'm alive now. So, as I was saying a bit before, I fear for my grandchildren, but probably I won't see it. Now you're an X gen, right? Gen X. You're about Ben's
Yeah.
age. Is that right?
I'm turning 52 this month.
Right.
So, and I've got two young boys, they're 5 and 6. And I look at their lives and I'm looking at them saying, you will never experience the teenage years I experienced. Your life will be completely, utterly different than any human life ever. And that is hard for me to get in my head around because I am right? They will be living a life 10, 20, 30 times or the singularity times different than any other human life in existence.
Probably they won't have jobs because as the machines become increasingly intelligent, to be employable as a human, you will need a very high intelligence. And so as the machines get smarter, the human level employable intelligence threshold will just keep rising until virtually nobody is employable. Machines are just doing everything. Now, once that happens, of course, governments will have to use the UBI, the Universal Basic Income, just handing out money for everyone. I don't see that so much as a problem because if you're interested in cultural anthropology, there's somewhere between, I read, 5 to 10,000 different cultures on the planet, and some of them work maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. Food is, in these tropical islands, food you just climb up a palm tree, so they don't have to work very hard. And so how do they fill up their day? Well, makeup rituals, religion, they have rich lives, rich cultural lives, and they don't feel depressed or anything, so they're fine. So the human brain's adaptable. So I see cultures surviving that way once there's no work, and a lot of people thrive that way. They'll adapt quite readily. But and if we can live in a global state that's fully democratic, that would be wonderful. So, I mean, get rid of wars, except for this big one that's coming.
But why would the machines keep us around? Like, why bother?
Well, that's maybe I didn't spell that out properly. The main fear of the Terrans is that for whatever reason, these Artilects may decide to get rid of us. Maybe just as a side effect. For example, imagine these Artilects think that, this oxygen is a real pest because it rusts our circuitry. So let's get rid of the oxygen. And if these Artilects are so hugely superior to us, they don't give a damn about us. So they get rid of the oxygen, we get wiped out. I mean, for example, I'm going to clap my hands. Probably I just killed, a zillion bacteria. As a human being, I don't give a damn, right? So if these Artilects become, just so massively trillions of times above us as humans in their mental capacities, their capacities to think, probably they just won't care. So if humanity decides to build these things, and they do exponentially shoot up in their intelligence, they may reach a point where they're just indifferent to us, the way we are to ants or bacteria, and therefore, for whatever reason, they may decide to get rid of us. Now
or not provide for us. I mean, we are very dependent beings. We need food and shelter and all these things. I mean, they could just not bother with any of that.
Yeah, for whatever reason. So
right.
So as terror politicians, preparing for the worst, and the worst case scenario is that we get wiped out for whatever. You may not even understand what the reason is, but once they exist, once they become smarter than us, once they're the dominant species, then are you so that they can. They're able to get rid of us. And so what's the risk of that happening? Well, if you're a Terran politician, you're thinking globally, the whole planet's population. What risk would you accept? Well, zero. You just wouldn't take the risk because there's just so much at stake. And therefore, you will not tolerate what the cosmists want. So your natural enemy would be the cosmos. And in the limit, when if these cosmos are really serious about building these things, then they have to be stopped. And in the limit, by killing, and hence the war, because the cosmos won't be passive. They'll prepare as well, and they'll have the same level of weaponry, 21st weaponry, and very powerful ideologies. God building versus human survival. These two bitter ideologies at each other's throats. So I'm hoping that you have what, 2 million or so followers?
Yeah,
Is that right?
2 million on YouTube and then another few million on other social platforms. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's wonderful. So I'm hoping that amongst some of your followers are government think tankers, members of think tanks who will take these ideas on board and say, "Oh my God, we these people in the think tanks, we've got to start thinking hard about this because it's probably just decades away, and if they're youngish, it'll be within their own lifetimes, so they'll be strongly motivated." So, given your age, by the time you're 70s, 80s, God knows what will have happened by then. Because
and so, is there things we can do about it? Because you talk about this future as is, it's going to happen. There's going to be two sides. What is there? Can we affect our fate? What will a think tank do that could solve this problem?
Well, now you're asking the $64,000 or $64 trillion question. There are scenarios where humanity does escape, right? And one obvious one, I suppose, would be that the takeoff time is very short. There's no time for human politics to unfold. They just come into being quickly, and it's just fait accompli. And then they decide, what are we, these intellects, what are we doing on this hick planet when there's a whole universe out there? So they just leave. And we humans, we survive. That's one scenario.
They don't leave anybody behind?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
So,
all right. Okay.
So I suppose the key word, if you're a Terran politician, the key word in this whole debate, I suppose, is risk. What percent risk are you prepared to take that these machines in hugely superior form, for whatever reason, even if you don't even understand it, for whatever reason, they may decide to get rid of us? Because this is a new situation. Because for the last 200,000 years or so, human beings have been dominant. We're not used to being number two.
No.
So are we going to be prepared to
No.
become the number two species? And my suggestion is a sizable proportion of humanity will not tolerate that we become number two, and will go to war to stop it. And another proportion of humanity, probably the smarter, in fact, the smartest, I can imagine a lot of the smartest people on the planet will keep getting run. Look, I'll
That's right. We're almost done with at least this version of this. When you come to England later in the year, we're going to do one in the studio for sure. Curious, Professor, what does the AI community think of you and your theories? I'm guessing some of them think that your theories scare people and that might have hurt AI research and the funding of research in the past. Tell me if I'm wrong. Or maybe they don't. I'm curious.
Well, I asked a bunch of computer scientists one time to vote, whether they're Terran or Cosmos, and the result was 80-20, 80 Cosmos, 80%. So that surprised me. That was in fact, they were 21-year-old Chinese computer science first-year master's students. So that I found interesting. Now, the other extreme, about 5 years ago, I got invited to talk to a bunch of American evangelicals in a Midwest state. and I asked them to vote, and you can imagine what happened. I'd say when I was, who's in favour of cosmism, and I think one or two hands went up in an audience of 3,000 people, and so that was stunning. I said, "Oh my God, you really have spoken." This message, because it was all filmed and video. This message will go to Washington. The evangelicals will not tolerate. They'll be strictly Terran. And then a couple of people came up to me and thanked me, said, we're evangelicals and we believe in the end times. And we're very grateful to you because now you have explained to us how it's going to happen. I thought that was amusing.
Did you go on to tell them that maybe the Bible had been written by the previous Artilex? And so, no, okay. Well, look, as humans, we're not ready to be second-class citizens. And if you look at the history of how humans treat second-class citizens, as in our animals, it's not pretty. And also, you might say, well, in the beginning, the machines leave us alone. But in a long enough timeline of 200,000 years, are you going to trust the fact that every microsecond they'll continue to decide to keep us around or not make a mistake? Probably not. So I'm just not putting on my Terran hat here, but I'm saying the Terrans have a pretty good argument that if you want the species to survive, you probably want to try to stop this. At the same point, it's unstoppable, and the human condition is to climb the mountain. It's the Oppenheimer. I'm going to build the bomb even though it can destroy us. And if you get into scientists, let alone AI scientists, that probably goes up a factor of 10 that they want to solve the problem. And so these are, immovable objects, unstoppable force. And so I have to agree with your assertion of the future. Bitter rivals or bitter dichotomy of the same human animal coming together and being forced to decide. And I think it's going to get very ugly. And
yep.
I appreciate your thoughts on it, Professor. What are your final thoughts for people here as far as, what are your final thoughts here? What do you want people to think about? What should they do if this conversation has piqued their interest or moved them? What should they do?
Well, in the last chapter or so of my book, I tried to answer this question. Is there a way where both parties are satisfied? And one idea I had was put a bunch of brilliant cosmists into a rocket, and they leave the Earth at extremely high speeds, and they just build their Artilex elsewhere, and so humanity survives. But then there's a counter argument to that, and that is, well, if they build their Artilex and the Artilex wipe out the cosmos in the rocket, and then because they're Artilex, they could return to the Earth, because the Earth is a wonderful receptacle of raw materials and atoms and whatnot, right? And so the Terran politicians on the Earth wouldn't even tolerate that. And so, these cosmos escape in a rocket. So I don't see any obvious way out. I've been trying for years to find a solution where both parties are satisfied. And I think it's, if I had to bet, I'd say probably a war is likely. Now, if the Terrans win the first time, well, I think it'll just be a repeat. Sooner or later, the cosmos arguments are so powerful, then there'll be a resurgence of cosmos thinking, and then there'll be another war. And maybe, again, the Terrans win. Well, you just keep cycling through until eventually the cosmos do win. And then humanity perhaps is kept in zoos, or we get wiped out totally, and then the Artilex move off into a whole new phase of evolution and go out there and do their thing and discover other hyper-intelligent creatures and who are billions of years older than them and so on. So, for the past year or decade or so, I've been not thinking about this too much because it's so horrible. I don't know if you're interested, but so what have I been doing for the last decade or so? Largely two things. One is when I was in China the first year, I was traveling a lot in trains, and I must have seen about half of the provinces of the country. A province is like a state in the US. And I'd stare out at all these villages, one after the other after other. It just meant there are 1 million villages in China, 1 million. So that's why Mao Zedong said Japan would never conquer China, because Japan had 2 million soldiers in China. That's 2 soldiers per village. I'm sure the villagers could take care of it. So, but I remember seeing these peasants on their water buffalo in the paddy fields and feeling utterly depressed, thinking, what a waste. They're just subsistence farmers growing their rice to stay alive. And yet 1% of them are really brilliant. If they'd had a decent education, they could get PhDs and build artilleries and whatever. So one of the things I do now is I try to provide master's and PhD level education in pure math and math physics and computing for free. So you probably saw the whiteboard behind. You can see the whiteboard behind me. Yeah. So I just write up the lectures on it, film it, send it off to YouTube and so on, so that students around the world can teach themselves for free. Because nearly the whole planet nowadays has a smartphone, a cell phone, a mobile. So they can use that to educate themselves. And the other thing, I don't know if you're interested or not, but is I'm very interested in gender politics. So I write that's men's lib, masculism, sort of like feminism, but for men. So I write theory for that. And that preoccupies me so that I don't have to think too much about these Cosmis-Terran horrors, because it's horrible.
Yeah, it is horrible. And no, I would love to dive more into the masculinity stuff, maybe when you come see us in London. I know okay. I find that stuff fascinating. I don't think it's spoken about enough, and I think we need to have these conversations. It's not necessarily political correct or the wokeness, but I think going down that road severely impairs us. So I find it really fascinating, some of the work you're doing when it comes to that. And I love open and honest discussions and debates about ideas. And I'm a big fan of freedom of speech and allowing people to speak their truth and then to debate it. I know you got a channel shut down from YouTube in 2019. We almost got our channel shut down in 2020 because I was broadcasting conversations that were questioning some of the lockdowns and some of those things. And so, yeah, I've been censored before, and it's I don't think it's very helpful. So yeah, I appreciate some of the things that you say.
I get my revenge against YouTube. Every Mascus video I put up on the internet, I'll have 4 links, 3 to alternative storage sites and 1 to YouTube. And so anyone who wants to watch any one of my over 600 now Mascus videos, whenever they tap on the YouTube, up comes a message, censored. And a tap on any of the other 3, they all work. So every time a user does that, they get the message, YouTube censors. And that's my revenge.
Yeah, they do censor, and yeah, we were very publicly censored back in 2020. We've actually got a documentary film coming about the whole thing in about 3 months. So if you're in Britain, we'll definitely get you over there for that. Professor, really appreciate
October?
October? It's going to be in July. Is that you're here in October? Yeah. Okay.
I'll be here in October. Yeah, and then the plan is 3 months every year from then on.
For you?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Good. Well, the Terrans will need you to fight, or the Cosmos, depending. And for everybody's watching, if they want to read the book, there's a link actually on our website where this episode is being featured, where people can click on it and get your book for free. I think it goes to your website.
Right. Yeah, it's free. Yes.
Yeah, that link's there. I highly recommend everyone check it out. I'm going to be going a little bit deeper on the book as well. Professor, I really appreciate you. I appreciate your ideas. I really hope you keep talking about this, because most of the world has no idea what is about to happen. I would say it's a bit like the early days of the pandemic when we saw somebody fall over in China and we thought, look at that curious thing that's happening over there, and then went on to get their latte and complain about their SUV not going fast enough, and they don't realize that this is coming. It's going to change everyone's lives forever, and probably the sooner people realize that, the better, I believe. But I look forward to you continuing to comment on this space, Professor, and thanks for putting these ideas out there.
Well, Brian, thank you for inviting me. You've given me a forum, and I really hope these think tankers, take it to heart and start thinking hard about government policy, because that's the next step. This whole issue has to go political. That's my take-home message. Do we build gods, or do we build our potential exterminators? That's the issue. Should humanity build Artilects?
I appreciate it, Professor. Thank you very much. We'll do this again when you're in London. And thanks to everybody for watching. We will see you next time on London Real. Take care, Professor. Take care, everybody else. Bye-bye.